Hey, Hakase here. This is my list of the most rippy boss and mob abilities in Act 3 for you to watch out for on your hardcore or softcore journey. You can use the chapters to skip to a specific boss if you're interested in just one or a couple of them. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not gonna cover the abilities that are obvious, I'm just gonna cover ones that can catch you out and really kill your character. Let's get started. First off, when you get to the jungle ruins, avoid eye contact with the monkey. I'm sure everyone knows this boss by now. What the f***? And just make your way to the infested barrens. I suggest coming back to jungle ruins towards the end of Act 3 when you've overleveled the zone a bit, so that you can kill the monkey, get your passive points, and also clear the venom crypts. When you do finally fight the monkey, I suggest not running away from him because his most dangerous ability is this frontal cone, and so it gets wider the further away you are from it. Just stay relatively close to him and try to always be on his side. In the infested barrens you will find the entrance to the Azak Bog, which contains the witch boss that will give you spirits similar to King in the Mists. And again, I suggest doing this boss later. She's not particularly difficult, but especially if you're playing hardcore, I suggest just minimizing your risk. When you do fight her, outside of very obvious abilities that don't do that much damage, the only thing for you to watch out for is when she summons these parallel bone spike rows, and she's gonna channel fire through that corridor created by the bone spikes, so you don't want to be too far away from her because the way to exit those bone spikes is going to be right beside her, so just stay close to her. The other thing is that you will find this ritual area in the zone with things for you to click, and once you clicked all of them you can go to the center of that area to get a buff to your magic find and fire resistance, and you'll need fire res for the boss. Next up we have the Chimera, which is a pretty annoying boss as it flies all the time, and it can also be really easy or it can just one-shot you out of nowhere. My advice would be not to get distracted by all his jumping around, and make sure that you're aware of his barrage of poison that he does from his tail. You need to be ready for this because this can easily kill you really fast. The other thing you should be ready for is that when he flies up, sometimes he'll land on one of these stone constructions and you can actually damage that stone construction. It doesn't have much health, and if you kill that thing then the Chimera will fall down and it will be stunned, so you can get some free damage on it. In general, this boss does all types of elemental damage and chaos damage, so ideally you'd have your resistances maxed and have at least some chaos res, but if you have to pick, I would pick some chaos res and a lot of frost res so you don't get frozen. Killing the Chimera is going to drop an inscribed ultimatum, which is going to give you access to the Temple of Chaos, where you can get your second ascendancy. But even more so than the first ascendancy, I highly recommend leaving this for way later. I personally do it after I finish the campaign on cruel difficulty. The Temple of Chaos is a very rippy place with very rippy bosses, and even after finishing the campaign, I feel like there is a chance that I might die. Next up, in Jikwani's Machinarium, you're gonna find Blackjaw the Remnant, and in my personal opinion, this is the most dangerous boss in the game. It is an optional boss, all it gives you is 10% fire res, and I would say avoid eye contact, avoid confrontation until like the end of Act 3, and be very careful of his double frontal slams. He also starts the fight with a frontal breath, so just stand to the side as soon as you pull him so that you don't get chunked right away. Always be on his side and take it slow, do not prioritize damage in this fight, and make sure you have a bunch of health or ES. Next up we have Zicoatl, and this guy looks scary but he's actually really easy. All you have to do is stand directly behind him, dodge some lines, and just have some lightning res to minimize all of his damage. The really dangerous things that he can do is, if you're in front of him, he can start pummeling you with all of his arms, so you really don't want to be in front of him, or if you're in front of him, just keep your distance. The only other notable thing he does is he spawns this fire triangle, and after a short while, each side of that triangle is gonna spawn like a flame wave, so you want to position yourself at one of the tips of the triangle and obviously not inside it. Next up we have the Drowned City, and one of the scariest mobs in the game, these hags that spawn these water bubbles. Now if you touch one of these water bubbles, it's going to dramatically slow you, and if you stay in it for like 2 or 3 seconds, you're just going to get one shot regardless of your health and ES or resistances. Whenever you're moving through the zone, just make sure to keep an eye out for these hags and be ready for them to spawn these water bubbles. Make sure you're not boxed into corners or surrounded by mobs, which would make dodging these bubbles or getting out of them impossible. Next up is the Molten Vault, which you'll find the entrance to in the Drowned City, and the thing that killing the boss inside unlocks is the Reforging Pit. So again, it's one thing that I suggest skipping for later because you really don't have much of a use for the Reforging Pit until endgame. And this boss is not that easy. He's got a lot of HP, hard-hitting abilities, and actually effectively an enrage timer. The room you fight him in is going to start filling up with lava, and if that lava touches you, you die. And there's limited space in the boss arena. Eventually it will get completely covered with lava and you're going to die, so you're going to have to kill him before that. Make sure you dodge all of his obvious abilities and never touch the lava. Fire resistance is also going to greatly help you here. Next up we have this wonderful lady, the Queen of Filth. As soon as the encounter starts, she's gonna do a huge rolling slam right through the middle of the room, so make sure you're not in front of her when the encounter starts. She's gonna repeat this forward roll ability throughout the encounter, and that's the biggest one that you want to watch out for because it does a massive amount of physical damage. Other than that, she's gonna spawn these mushrooms. Whenever you walk over them, you trigger them and they're gonna explode like a second later. You don't want to let the room fill up with these, so you just want to trigger them sometimes so you have space to move. She's also going to spawn curse circles that do various nasty things to you, so don't be in them for too long. And other than that, she's going to spawn waves of ads that come into the room, so be ready to deal with them. This is another one of those fights where you probably want to prioritize survival over damage. Next up we have the Temple of Kopec, and before we get to the boss, I would say watch out for the middle zone. The middle zone, as you get closer to it, it starts doing fire damage to you. So you basically don't want to stay in it for too long and you want to get into the shadows. But the reality is, if you have fire resistance, that fire damage is not very high, but it can make you do silly things and run into huge groups of mobs and get killed. So when you approach the center and there are mobs there, I would suggest pulling them back and killing them off before making the traverse. And if you do run near the middle and pull a bunch of mobs, don't be scared of being in the middle. Make sure that you survive the mobs, because the mobs are actually what's going to kill you, not the fire damage that's radiating from the middle. Once you get to the top, you're going to face Ketzuli, High Priest of the Sun. This guy does obviously fire damage, so fire resistance, and to be honest, this is probably one of the most anticlimactic and easiest bosses in the game. He's not difficult at all, just dodge all the obvious stuff. Next up we have Xyclucian, and probably the most mechanically challenging boss in the campaign, mostly because you're kind of forced to deal with her mechanics. She has a lot of health and she goes immune when doing some of her mechanics. Chaos resistance will help you massively on this boss, and another thing that will help you is having a shield. She does this frontal where she throws out venom projectiles in front of her, and blocking some of those is great because if you get hit by the whole barrage or even half of it, you might just die, since it's chaos damage and chaos resistance is hard to come by at that point in the game. When you're just fighting her in her normal phase, dodge her frontals and dodge her slams. At some point she's gonna fly up into the air and start bombarding the arena with fire and chaos circles. Just focus on dodging them. You can still hit her in this phase, but I would not recommend it unless you're really comfortable doing that. Another phase that she has is when these shieldmen start attacking you with their spears, taking turns, and you just wanna outrange one side of the shields by standing next to another one, and just move out of the ones that start glowing green. At the end of the phase, the shieldmen will all get highlighted in green in like a wave, and that will signify the direction against which you have to dodge roll, because at that point all of the spears are going to go out one by one throughout the arena. When this phase finishes, one of the rows of shieldmen is going to move inwards, effectively reducing your arena space. Overall, this fight is difficult because she does have a decent amount of health, and she has two mechanics where it's either very difficult or simply impossible to damage her. On top of that, she does chaos damage, which is hard to get resistances for, so in my opinion, this is a pretty stressful boss. Okay, so we finally made it to the last boss of Act 3, Doryani, and to be honest, this guy is a lot easier than the previous boss Viper Napuatzi. In phase 1 he just floats around and does a bunch of obvious stuff that you can easily dodge, and in phase 2 he gets into his huge machine. In general, you want to stay at the ass of this machine, outside of one point when it starts channeling lasers. At that point it will channel lasers out in a cone from its behind, and it will rotate around the room in a clockwise direction. But to be honest, if you have enough resistances and defenses, you can just ignore this completely. Two other notable things he does is this huge circle where there's lightning on the outside of the circle. You want to be inside the circle to not get hit. The other thing to watch out for is when the machine flies in the air, it's going to start following you, and it has this huge targeting circle, and at the end of that follow period it's going to slam down. Now, to make it easy to get out of that circle, I suggest having a decent amount of movement speed or having a shield charge, which kind of trivializes the mechanic. And that's it. Congratulations, you've beaten Act 3 and it's time to do it all over again in cruel mode. I've been really enjoying my Essence Drain Chronomancer, and if you're interested in a build that's good for SSF or hardcore, and that is also very ethical, I would highly suggest you check out my next video where I cover this build. See you there.